Okay, everybody, I am Debbie Potts, and I'm so excited to talk to you about one of my favorite topics, how to train the low carb athlete. And I've been doing this for a long time, and I'm excited to share this information with the keto world because it's not often talked about. So I'm going to help you learn how to improve fat loss, gain athletic performance, and longevity by focusing on ways we can train, fuel, and perform our best as endurance athletes. So who am I? What am I talking about this for? Well, this is kind of my background. This is my passion and my purpose to talk about nutrition and health and performance training. So I've had over 25 years of experience in the health and fitness industry. I started as a personal trainer, and over the years, I just, as you can see, continue to educate myself. It just doesn't end because there's so much to learn, and we keep learning all the time. So recently I became a FDN practitioner and nutritional therapy practitioner before that, and really just putting this information together to help athletes of all levels be fat burners and also work on improving their health, because a lot of athletes, we'll maybe get to, are not healthy on the inside. They may look good on the outside, but under the hood, they're not so healthy. And also how, too much exercise can cause stress and contribute to our overloading our beaker of stress and all sorts of things. So really, I love talking about this. I'm excited to share a little bit about my background. I was a competitive age group athlete. If you read my book, Life is Not a Race, I have not been able to race since 2013. And I have a podcast called the Low Carb Athlete podcast where you can hear all about this stuff every week. And we've had that for 10 years. So there's 450 episodes already on all things burning fat and health building. So my background as an athlete, I started doing endurance events in 1999. I feel so old when I write this stuff down, but suddenly I'm 48 now, so I'm getting older. But my first race was in 99 doing a marathon. And then I was doing endurance cycling events. And I thought, why not do an Ironman? I just have to learn how to swim. So I started doing Ironmans in 2001 and stopped racing in 2012. So I've done many races, 15 Ironmans. I've done, I don't know how many marathons, 50K trail runs, and half marathons. So I've done a ton of endurance stuff. So I started to think outside the box when I was starting to train in 2001, doing these long distance events. I was following the recommended fuel strategies, right? That we all know, the high carb and, eating the healthy diet of having a bagel and orange juice and a banana. And I started trying to figure out how to fuel for these longer bike rides and longer runs. And I was taking the gels, I was doing all these sugary drinks, and it wasn't helping. I was just kept struggling with excess weight gain. And like, here I am doing Ironman stuff, all these hours and hours of training. Plus I was a personal trainer teaching cycling, step aerobics and all that kind of stuff. And I wasn't losing weight. So I finally started to think outside the box about 2003, probably. I was training by heart rate, and we'll talk about training by heart rate to burn fat in a bit. But just want to share this story with you briefly because there's so much I've learned. And I think a lot of you here are, keto people interested in health and longevity and performance. But a lot of it is, thinking outside the box. We're all probably connected because we stopped following the standard American diet, realizing the recommendations don't work and don't make us feel good, look good, or, healthy on the inside out. So I started trying to not eat before workouts, going from my healthy food of eating, the bagels and orange juice and having a Cliff Bar every hour and drinks. And I explained all that in my book, Life is Not a Race, so I won't go into it, but it's just so much I've learned. So I started being more lower carb and fasted workouts. And I did this low heart rate training, and I did metabolic efficiency testing myself. And I really learned, starting back probably 2005, how to burn fat as an endurance athlete. So I started to win my age group. I qualified for Ironman Hawaii 5 times. I did Boston Marathon many years, and just it became my thing, my passion. So since then, I have my podcast and my book, and I did create the holistic method when it's about, training for fuel or training for fat loss in health and performance. It's really not just our exercise, not just what we eat, but I'm not going to go into this presentation, but we really need to work on optimizing our sleep, managing our stress, getting movement, mobility the rest of the day, yoga, working on digestion and gut health, hydration, and for a lot of athletes that are type A, AAA, a little wound too tightly, that we need to learn how to chill out, relax, play, and laugh. So that's what the holistic method's about, training the whole you to improve performance. Today, we're going to talk about low carb athlete, hot topics I hear a lot about in different forums online, really talking about what metabolic flexibility is and metabolic efficiency. Oh, I forgot to fix that, but metabolic efficiency, we'll talk about how to test that, optimal fat metabolism, and carb timing, all sorts of stuff. So pictures on the screen here. You can see a lot of you are familiar with the blood sugar roller coaster. That's why we switched to low carb, high fat, and get more keto to balance the blood sugar. So we're training our body to burn fat for fuel. But a lot of people don't really apply that to athletes and endurance athletes. And we want to train the body to burn fat for fuel and have that as our main fuel tank. So we'll talk about that. Okay, so common problems as athletes, depending on what level of endurance workout you do, but you might have started with having, the Gatorade and the Cliff Bar and the gels and the goos and drink mixes, and you might have felt this before. Maybe that's why you're here listening today. But common problems that one of the fuel companies I like, S Fuels founder, created S Fuels based on his issues, which are so common for athletes, endurance athletes especially, muscle fatigue and tightness, because we're dependent on glucose or carbs. Inflammation, he had a lot of heavy use of anti-inflammatories after long training days, like Advil, Aleve. Friends used to call it vitamin I, and having that ibuprofen all the time. Digestive issues, a lot of athletes have GI stress. And resistant belly fat, being fit, but you're still fat. Why is that? And high risk for that spiking and crashing blood sugar, that blood sugar roller coaster that a lot of people have, but athletes especially will get it. And also the DNF means did not finish. A lot of people racing might have felt the hitting that wall. They have gut distress, they're throwing up while they're doing a race, or they hit the kind of bonking feeling at the end of the race because they ran out of fuel in their tanks. They're burning carbs. So inflammation is a big thing for a lot of people from that blood sugar. So those are common symptoms I know a lot of athletes have until you start thinking outside the box, like, why am I feeling this way? Burning fat versus carbs. So we want to flip that switch, become a fat burning athlete. So I'm going to put, I have a hard time limiting my slides to 20 to 30 because there's so much to go into. So I'm going to make this into an ebook for you. So I'll send you my website at the end of the presentation today so you can go to the website and download these slides because there's so much to go into. And I like to make them little ebooks because I put so much info in there and I kept adding more to it the longer I had to play with this. So I think a lot of you know from probably other seminars at KetoCon are talking about fat metabolism. So we're really training the endurance athlete to burn fat as their main fuel tank to oxidize fat. And so as we're exercising, we'll talk about metabolic efficiency, but the higher intensity to go, we want to be able to burn more fat. So there's a way to burn more fat the longer duration, the higher intensity we go. So I won't go into that slide too much, but when I started racing endurance events and I like to win, so I was a little more competitive. I wanted to get a competitive edge, and that's when I started thinking, what happens if I don't eat all these carbohydrates? And at first, you don't feel so good. The first time I tried doing a spin class and went for a long bike ride with people, I ended up having a nap on a side of a road while I continued the ride, and I didn't have any fuel because I'm like, all right, I have all this fat in my body. What am I going to do? So there's a transition period of time. I came back to life having a Cliff Bar, which is like 50 grams of carbohydrates, what most of us have an entire day now. But back then when I was starting to be curious about being fat burning, and this is way back in 2002, I did a Seattle to Portland bike ride. I remember that day precisely when I was sitting at the park at a rock waiting for people, and I actually had a nap. So, you know, you want to work on becoming fat adapted gradually, because if we are depending on that fat fuel tank or carb fuel tank, we're turning off the fat fuel tank. So there's leaders in the industry that I'll share the book of Steve Volek and Jeff Finney. They're like the pioneers in this low carb endurance athlete. Peter Tia has done plenty of self N=1 research studies and has a huge blog. You can follow him. Professor Noakes has done a ton of research down in South Africa. Bob Seebehor created metabolic efficiency specialist training. And then Dr. Dan Plews has done a ton of research and working with S Fuels. And he's done a lot with Paul Larson. And Phil Maffetone and Paul Larson have done a lot of research as well. So there's tons of information out there, and there's more coming. But just some few tips I wanted to add in here. You know, if you're constantly fueling with carbs, you stop burning fat, as I said. And Peter Attia put it nicely that it's like you're putting paper on the fire first, preventing you from burning the logs. And a lot of athletes are told to carb load. We need all these carbs. So we load up and then we work out, we have all more carbs, and then we're done working out, we have even more carbs. So when I was training people for half marathons and marathons over the last 20 years, a lot of people started to gain weight when they're training for a marathon. And it was interesting to me that people thought I need to eat more because I'm exercising. Well, you can find out it doesn't quite work. So a lot of people would, you know, have that high fructose corn syrup that a lot of the supplements have in there, rice, pasta, bread. You know, have this idea that we need to load up on carbs so we can go for that long run or long bike ride. And return, you have this constantly elevated blood sugar levels, and that's going to increase your insulin and that blood sugar roller coaster we talked about, and that insulin resistance that a lot of people get, even athletes. And I think we need to remember the fuel tank we'll talk about is really important, fat burning. So the key book to look at is called The Art and Science of Low Carbohydrate Performance, written by Dr. Volek and Dr. Finney. And they've done a lot of studies, and the famous one most recently is the, FASTER study. But I have to throw in there, we've done podcasts on this, that it was done on men, not women. And women, as Dr. Stacy Sims says in her book, are not small men. So we need to always look at research and remember we are unique individuals, and everything's always going to be a little different per person. So use this kind of as baseline information to start with an experiment. But they have a whole book. It's pretty easy read, but fascinating for those that are curious about the low carb athlete, and realizing our goal to be metabolically flexible. So we're not dependent on carbohydrates, but we're dependent on fat as our main fuel tank. Keep in mind we have that 2,000 calories of fat or 2,000 calories of carbohydrates available in our muscle storage. Or if we can learn how to tap into the fat as our main fuel tank, that's our way to get optimal performance as well as longevity. But so many athletes are still following those guidelines of eat carbs, but I always say, and I made t-shirts once, eat carbs, burn carbs. So I said, you know, if you want to eat fat, you'll burn fat. So you want to be able to have your body depend on the fat burning tank, and know that your glycogen tank should be your backup, your reserve. It's when you need that rocket fuel. And that's what we'll talk about carb timing for athletes. Because a lot of the research out there for keto and athletes or keto in general, is not based on athletic performance or endurance athletes. So we can have a little bit more carbohydrates. It's not that they're all evil. So there's good carbs to add in as needed for some people. And so there's great information out there. This is a common story that I want to share with the founder of S Fuels, why he created the product, a low carb product for endurance athletes. But this typical story, a lot of you can probably relate. If the transition from going from high carbs to low carb, this person started in 2013, he reduced his miles down to 90%, reduced his grains, sugary bars, the breads, the pastas, rice, juices, and all those sport drinks. Instead of that, he added more quality fats and low glycemic carbohydrates into his training diet. And then he got into his race season and increased the mileage and found his body had the fueling flexibility. So we call that metabolic flexibility, where you're able to burn fat, then go to carbs as needed and still be able to keep burning fat. So you had more tolerance to endure those long training sessions without feeling that fatigue and slow recovery and repair from the sessions. So why not eat the carbs over the fat? I'm sure a lot of you already know that. A lot of things I said already, but insulin resistance, we have more GI stress, we eat carbs and train above our fat burning heart rates. We're just depending on carbs for fuel. So we lose that metabolic flexibility. We lose that fat burning enzymes if we're on too many carbohydrates. And you have to eat so much more when you're a carb burner. You have to eat before, during, and after. If you're a fat burner, you'll realize, like I did Ironmans with barely anything, and I did quite well in my age group. So you have to train to do this and transition to be a fat adapted athlete, not just try what I did and just try it one day and just think you're still going to be okay. So to train to be a low carb athlete, we want to train the slow twitch aerobic muscle fibers. That's where the mitochondria, we want to get them stronger, more resilient, because that's where we're going to burn that fat. We want to avoid overtraining and under recovery syndrome. And I talk about this in the part 2. I'll do a follow-up on my podcast about this, because a huge topic of a lot of athletes are training too frequently, too high of heart rate, and not enough recovery time. And also I call it the black hole training. Ben Greenfield talks about that. In between the low heart rate and in between HIIT training is the black hole, and we want to avoid that. Training above fat burning ranges. So we'll talk about maffetone, max aerobic function next, but we're not training those slow twitch muscle fibers if you're always doing the high heart rate work. And that doesn't help for endurance athletes. When you're doing an Ironman, which is, if you're not familiar, is 2.4 mile swim, 112 mile bike, 26.2 mile run, or a 50K trail run. There's no way we can just depend on that carb fuel source tank and survive without having tons of issues. So metabolic flexibility is our key thing. So there's great research from Dr. Daniel Plews, who's out of New Zealand, that he did other research with Paul Erson. I've done a lot of podcasts with as well. So they have a great article with Phil Maffetone's called Rethinking Roles of Carbohydrates and Fat for Performance, and they had that published back in 2015. So we want to look at a little bit overall here, flipping the switch, metabolic flexibility, stabilizing your blood sugar, knowing when to put carbohydrates in as like good sources of sweet potatoes, or more, some people call paleo carbohydrates, paleo source, that the real food and not all the bad sugars. Some people can add a little bit more and have that extra rocket fuel. And then fat adapted athletes can improve their performance longevity. So again, Volek and Finney have tons of research to look at. So what is metabolic flexibility? You hear all the time. Well, some of the definitions I found are, it's defining as ability to adapt to substrate oxidation rates in response to changes in fuel availability. So the opposite of metabolic flexibility is the inability to switch the oxidation of lipid and carbohydrate. Appears to be an important feature of chronic disorders as obesity, type 2 diabetes. So that's what a lot of us in the keto low carb world, we're striving to have that metabolic flexibility. So metabolic efficiency is another word we talk about in this world of endurance sports. So as we know, we have two main fuel sources, carbohydrates and fats, and ketones are in there, but your body, again, 2,000 calories, will deplete that if you're burning carbohydrates 2 to 3 hours if you're a carb burner, versus fats are slowly converted in energy. So nice, steady energy fuel source. So you have tens of thousands of calories, even on lean endurance athletes. So Bob Seebehor, I did his training, a metabolic efficiency testing specialist years ago. And I used to do treadmill bike tests on people and measure their metabolic efficiency as well as at rest. And what that means is that it's a test where you measure your oxygen and carbon dioxide, and we measure how well your body uses fat as an energy source. And it's efficiency that can be improved through exercise and nutrition. And for athletic training, we work on tweaking your exercise, so more lower heart rate training, that aerobic engine fat burning ranges earlier in your training cycle. Then we add some tempo and speed work. And then we also support stabilizing your blood sugars by eating the right macronutrients of fat, protein, and carbohydrates instead of being that carb dependent athlete. So Bob Seymour has done a ton of information. Also Kirsty Woods and some other folks in New Zealand have a lot of information. They do metabolic efficiency training over there for obesity. So they've done tons of great studies. We've done some podcasts. So this is what, if you did a treadmill test or a bike test, this is what I'm measuring. Crossover points, this metabolic crossover point where this black solid line down here, your carbohydrate usage goes up. If you increase your speed, say every 5 minutes on a treadmill, for example, and this is your fat burning up here. We want to find where your fat burning drops and your carbohydrate usage goes up. So that's a great way, if you can find anyone to test in your area, metabolic efficiency testing. It's a little harder to find. I did New Leaf testing cart, but Lifetime Fitness bought it. So if you go to Lifetime Fitness, they have that access to that cart. And then other ones, not many of us can do because they're $20,000, $25,000 to buy these testing carts. So there's different options out there, but it's a little harder. If you can do this, it's amazing information because we're so individual and you can really dial in where your ranges are right now based on your training and your nutrition planning. So it's called this metabolic efficiency point, and we can adjust and improve this with our training. So with the carbohydrates, once they're reduced, you don't have as much gut distress, nausea, diarrhea, gas, and bloating that a lot of athletes get in a longer duration when they're burning carbs and taking up all those sugars. Another example of fuel used during submaximal exercise, this on the left is a high carb diet, and then this is a low carb diet. So minutes during their exercise down here. So the longer duration, we should be burning higher percentage of fat. And if you're eating carbohydrates excessively, you're going to be burning primarily carbohydrates as your fuel source. So metabolic efficiency specialists will adjust this for you when you're doing coaching with athletes or coaches experiencing metabolic efficiency. Is 75% of it is tweaking your nutrition, 25% of it is tweaking your exercise. So Maffetone has been doing this for 35 years probably, Phil Maffetone. He's like the father of creating that aerobic engine and nutrition and for the endurance athletes. My coach that I trained with, Mark Allen, worked with Phil Maffetone back when Mark won 7 Ironmans, the Hawaii World Championship, because he was doing this low heart rate training and really accessing his fat burning capability. And this is back in the 80s. Over time, Maffetone is called max aerobic function heart rate for MAF. And this is what he's doing now, is talking about nutrition, exercise, and stress to get that maximum aerobic function. So they had an article I found on 7 signs of fat burning. Obviously, your clothes fitting more loosely, that's kind of given. Improved performance, you can just tell your training and racing levels improve. We'll talk about doing a MAF test that you can do once a month, and you get faster at that lower heart rate, and working on, your performance and longevity by burning fat. But one big thing is on here, the single common denominator that triggers most fat burning is elimination of, ding, 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 refined carbohydrates. So it's really training your fat burning zone by working on your nutrition and your exercise. So signs if you're storing too much body fat, because a lot of athletes, as I said, gain weight, or they have a challenging time losing weight because even if they're changing the way they eat, if you're doing keto and you're doing exercise, you're probably exercising too high of heart rate too frequently and not enough time in the lower heart rate. Other elements would be the stress, because chronic stress, as you can learn in my other ebooks and podcasts, is going to kind of ruin everything because you're raising that blood sugar with that stress response and fight or flight. So those are some suggestions. And then the Maffetone method, max aerobic function heart rate. I've been doing this since I started racing in 2000. Well, back then I was doing heart rate training and started doing strict Maffetone with Mark Allen back in 2003. And I started winning races and I started qualifying for Ironman Hawaii and Boston Marathon each year. So what it means is that we're trying to figure out, based on a formula that Maffetone figured out years ago, and you can learn all about it on philmaffetone.com. Just look up MAF, the 180 heart rate formula. But it's this formula that talks about your aerobic and max fat burning range. So you take 180 minus your age, and then if you have a few different elements, you add a number or subtract that. So you subtract additional 10 from that 180 age. So say you're 50 years old, your max aerobic function from that 180 minus your age would be 130 heart rate. So if I've been recovering from major illness, I've been in rehab, some injury, regular medications, stage 3 chronic overtraining, adrenal HP axis burnout, you want to take another 10. So that means my max aerobic function heart rate would be 120. So if I was coaching one of my clients that had those different factors going on, I would give them their training window to just stay 110 heart rate to 130 or 120 with this example, because we had to subtract additional 10 heartbeats. But if you're injured and have regressed or not improved in training, or you're just getting back, restarting, you can just subtract additional 5. So that would be 125 heart rate would be my high end. And then if you've been consistently training for at least 4 times a week for 2 years without any issues, you just keep that 180 minus your age. So say that's 130. And then if you've been training with more than 2 years without any problems, you've made progress on your monthly MAF test that they talk about, then you can add 5. So then it'd be 135. So it just gives you an idea, but it really, I've done this for, let's see, like 15 years with people. So it's been a long time. Actually, it's 2020. So it's almost 20 years. I forget how old I'm getting, but I've been doing this forever. And this really just makes a difference. To train your aerobic engine to burn fat, it's main fuel. And when I was racing my best before I quit racing, I could train and get more metabolically efficient up to 150 heart rate and be burning a ton of fat. And so that it just increases that metabolic engine the more you do this. So optimal fat metabolism is another thing we talk about. Fat is your fuel. Peter Defty created OFM. And what that means is it's just a program to talk about what we're going into as being fat adapted athlete. And he has a unique perspective that instead of labeling it like you're the keto world or the high carb world, that we're working on individuality. And this is kind of what I agree with, that we're all individuals. Your goal is to burn fat, but I don't like to put a label on it for athletes, because we should be burning fat as your main fuel, be metabolically flexible and adapt, because we're optimizing our fat metabolism. So he created a program that uses Vespa, and we'll talk about that later with different suggestions for fuel. But you know, a lot of common challenges for athletes in their performance, or we talked about, is it can happen if people are too low carb. So this is kind of examples of if you're too low carb or too high carb. This is why it's so important to learn to work N=1, that you are a bio-individual, because there's not a one-size-fits-all approach, because we're all different. We have different bodies, microbiomes, different lifestyle stresses, and more. So bonking can happen with people go too low carb, too keto. People that work in high intensity levels can have some issues, GI issues. Both keto and high carb can produce GI issues. People have taken too much MCT oil during a race, they might have some disaster pants. And the post-exercise soreness for some people. And then the adrenal stress, I'll talk about that in another show, but I was doing fasting for years, and you can learn about my story, what happened in 2013. I was doing low carb, I was doing fasted workouts, I was doing low heart rate training, but I was also burning the candles at both ends. I was getting up at 4 in the morning and not getting home till 9 o'clock at night. And so chronic stress, even though you're doing all this healthy stuff, will kind of throw out everything and cause this breakdown and burnout that happened to me since 2013. So what is OFM, the Optimal Fat Metabolism Pyramid? Is to help you eliminate GI issues. So I just like how he organizes it. And you can go to the OFM website to learn more, but helps just work on performance and longevity as we're talking today, teaching you to be fat adapted, working on nutrition, not counting calories, working on improving digestion and gut health, training and lifestyle. And that correlates with my holistic method program I do with athletes, is really managing your stressors, external as well as I talk about hidden internal stressors. Proper hydration. A lot of us just need to drink more water and have some sea salt in there, and maybe have a little bit more aminos in their water post-workout. Vespa is what Peter suggests and he uses, and strategic carbohydrates for people when they are racing to add in, because it does act like rocket fuel when you take it out and you put it back in. Similar to like coffee. If you take out coffee for a few weeks and then you put it back in, it might give you a little bit more buzz. So using fat as your main fuel is our goal. Remember, we're bio individuals. You want to learn how to be an intuitive athlete. And Peter Duffy talks a lot about that. And I always agree with that same philosophy, that we have to empower each client and coach them to learn how to be intuitive and how to adapt in their own lifestyle. And that's always changing, right? It's like our stress right now is going to be different. Hopefully in 6 months from now, it's always going to be changing. So less need for consumed carbohydrates during long races. As you're fat adapted, you really don't need much to none. Almost cut nutrition plan in half if you're a fat burning athlete. Eat less during competition, less gut, GI stress, perform your best without fat, or when you're burning fat, and less damage. I used to do my Ironmans before I knew this information back in 2001 to about 2003, always following the directions. And I must say, I was throwing up everything I took in. That's why I thought about thinking outside the box and going down this journey back in 2003, because what I was doing wasn't working. So that's when you get to a point that I think we all probably can relate. That's why KetoCon brings us all together, because what we were doing, what we were told, did not work and give me the optimal performance benefits or help me lose weight and feel good and look good. And that's always my goal, big goal, to look good, feel good on the inside and out. So how do you improve your fat burning? Well, you already probably know from other speakers about how to be fat adapted, taking out those carbohydrates, getting fat burning. Some of us do a little more fasted workouts, so adding in some coffee in the morning with some MCT oil. So you hear about that bulletproof coffee Dave Asprey started. Other people, just call it fat coffee, have some heavy cream or have some coconut oil, MCT oil, and have some collagen. That's something some people do. So I'll talk about other tips here, but just to remember, it's not a one size fits all. We all have to adjust. So when I'm coaching athletes, like someone right now, I had him, okay, let's work on your training and let's look at matching your nutrition with your training, and let's do more lower heart rate work and less anaerobic work, because you're blowing out that glycogen stores if you're always doing high heart rate work. So we want to build step one, that fat adapted metabolic state, and then with nutrition, and then work on aerobic engine. And then when we do have those carbohydrates as rocket fuel, good sources that we'll talk about in a race or towards a finish, like in Ironman, that Coca-Cola of all things actually is rocket fuel when you don't have it. And then the end of a run in an Ironman, it really helps give you a little boost. So it's not saying all carbs are bad. And I think a lot of people get in that camp that they think, zero carbs, we don't need carbs. But I think it's a little different for athletes, endurance athletes. Sometimes when you're racing a high level at a higher heart rate, you may need to have a little something. So a little more on fat for fuel. I'm going to skip over that because I want to talk about some fat burning tips if you're not doing endurance events. But strength training is really important. I really do wish people would lift more weights. Ideally, we have our gyms open and we can get into lifting weights, less reps, more heavier weights, functional strength training, doing fasted cardio in the morning when you're doing shorter sessions, up to 45 minutes to 2 hours. You really just can go off water and sea salt, and maybe I like a little coffee with heavy cream. Walking after a meal is beneficial for digestion, and standing up after a meal. Adding more plants, herbs, spices, more fiber for helping that gut health, and You can learn more from Karan at Microbiome Labs about that. Apple cider vinegar, you can look that up. Has tons of benefits for digestion, blood sugar regulation, gut health. That's a lot of information on that, to add that in some warm water or cold water. Helps with fasted workouts. And then some morning walk, daytime walk, getting that vitamin D, low heart rate training. And then of course, there's tons of information on cold thermogenesis and infrared saunas and stuff we'll talk about in another show. So athletes, we have this kind of periodization. How do we do this? We've got a prep, base, build, peak, race, and transition period. And Peter Defty talks about this in his optimal fat metabolism program. And this is what I do with my clients is, starting with a prep period, 2 to 6 weeks, base period, 8 to 12 weeks, and then build period is about 6 to 10 weeks. And you can get more information. My friend Stephanie Holbrook put some great blogs together on her keto endurance page. But what I do a lot more now with my clients as I became an FDN practitioner is really assessing if you're fit and healthy on the inside and out. What is looking under the hood? Because a lot of the training that we do is not necessarily healthy for you. So yes, we definitely need to be fat burners to prove our health. Get off that insulin's resistance blood sugar roller coaster, but less damage to our cells by not doing excessive exercise and constant stress. So I like having my clients use Keto Mojo or some other company, but testing their blood sugar. Are you eating the right amount to balance your blood sugar? Are you burning fat? Are you burning some ketones, like 0.5 to 1.0 is a great amount. But then also these hidden internal stressors that we don't know about unless we run functional lab tests. So example, the Dutch test is bottom right corner, measuring our hormones. I like doing a gut dysbiosis test, like a GI map, and I like doing a leaky gut test to figure out, is your gut wall lining intact? Are you absorbing those nutrients? Are you back up? Are you even breaking your food down properly with enzymes and having enough stomach acid to keep the bad guys out? Is your gut wall lining able to protect you from having enemies come through, foreigners coming through your gut wall line with leaky gut? So there's all sorts of stuff there I've been talking about on my podcasts and blogs. But remember, 80% of your immune system's in your gut. So we want to be healthy. Even if you're exercising, you still need to be aware of your health on the inside out. So last little bit, fueling as a low carb athlete. What you eat is what we talk about all the time, but I also talk with clients about how you're eating. Are you sitting down, chewing your food, digesting? As athletes, we're often multitasking. We're busy. You end up doing too much a day, so a lot of that creates more stress. So how you eat is really important, because if you're eating in the sympathetic nervous system, you're in fight or flight. So your digestion processes are not going to work ideally. So we want to work on what, how, when, and why are you eating? Again, self-experimenting, N=1, and that is really looking at genetics. I like doing DNA Fit. I like Dr. Ben Lynch's strategy to look at your genetic markers as well there. Some of us, like myself, like to tend to get stressed more often and have that in fact impact my health. So some reasons you can look at your genetic reports and know that you might need to have a little support. So what to eat, you know it from all the other speakers probably. Wild caught fish, grass-fed beef, healthy fats is avocado, coconut, ghee. It's the same thing for athletes. But what we're doing is perhaps you add before a big training block is, or high intensity workout, a little bit more vegetables like broccoli and cauliflower. Maybe you have a little bit of potatoes with butter on it, and you can have little sweet potatoes. Sometimes we do better. So what I've been struggling with is, am I doing too low carb? Am I fasting too long? So I have to always make these adjustments based on where you are right now with stress, your hormones, your age, female versus male. We're all so different. So I've been trying to not fast as long because I feel like I wasn't getting anywhere. I wasn't losing weight. So then you have to go, okay, am I doing what I'm doing now? Is it helping me? Then you need to assess and course correct, because it's always going to change. And you can't just listen to what everyone else is doing and what they post on social media, because you're all different. So different ideas. I'll go back here. UCAN, S Fuels, Vespa, F Bombs, the fat bombs. I like those. There's Vitamin Club that makes electrolytes. There's Keon that I like their amino acids. Athletic Greens I love to take every day. Also Megaspore, Total Gut Restoration Program. I have their prebiotics and mucosal barrier I throw in sometimes with my aminos. Bone broth every day is really essential for gut healing repair and post workouts as well as surgeries. And then little snacks I'll take, maybe if I need a little something before a long ride. Macadamia nuts, avocado. I like making my chia seed pudding with some heavy cream and some nut butter and have a few bites of that when I'm going for a longer duration. Products to use when racing, I'll just touch on this real quick because we're running out of time. S Fuels, they have a train program product and you can read their website. They have a great little handbook to get started, but the low carb transition, low carb living, low carb training, and racing high intensity. So they talk about that, like low carb transitioning, starting from, you know, a typical athlete might be eating 400 grams to 600 grams of carbohydrates a day. So you don't want to switch to 50 grams right away. It's just kind of, some people need a little transition going from 35 to down to 35 to 50 grams for a few weeks and getting that body to get into fat oxidation and nutritional ketosis. And then maintaining that low carb, high fat lifestyle with 50 to 150 grams. So that range is huge because no one's the same. We can't just say everyone go 50 grams and start there. You know, you have to make that little experiment. Do you feel better? Are you full longer? How's your energy level? How's your sleep? You know, all these different things are going to have impact on what amount of grams you should have, because I know everyone wants specific numbers, but can't do that. So low carb training. And then racing at high intensity, that's when you might need to add a little of the pre-digested low osmolality starch, and that's what UCAN is, a slow release starch, and then S Fuels has their race, that's a slow release starch. And other options they have are bars, and then there's Generation UCAN, that's a slow, steady release. So if you just need that little bit of the backup fuel, it won't spike your blood sugar up, is Generation UCAN. So you might have heard of that. They've been around a long time. So that's an option. And then there's Vespa that's worked to, it stabilizes your blood sugar, but it's based from bees, and you can add it in your workout. They say, like example down here I posted is Vespa 45 minutes before, and then every 2 hours have a little bit in a window. So those are some examples. I find that I have to listen to my own body and figure out what works. So I'm not racing, so I don't really need carbohydrates, but if you are racing, you might find that you might need a little more as you get towards that race season. And so goal is to train the whole you to burn fat. And the holistic method 8 elements are nutrition, exercise, sleep, stress management, stress reduction, movement, mobility. We've got digestion and gut health, hydration, happiness, and play. So if you want more information, I work as a health detective and a coach, nutritional therapy assessment. I kind of put it all together in a 90-day program, or people just want to check what they're doing and see if they need to tweak it. You can set up a discovery call. I just don't take clients. I like to talk to them first to see what your goals are, what I do, explain what I do a little bit, and see if we're a good fit, and then see if what my programs, different services I have are good for you. So I'll put this into an ebook, but you can head to debbiepotts.net and get a free copy of the slides and ebook. So let me know what questions you have. Also, Facebook page is Low Carb Athlete, and Instagram. So I'd love to hear from you. Thanks so much for listening today.